If you have rails like these, you probably have the Schwintek slide out system. And what do you do when things go wrong?
Ladies and gentlemen, attention please, about to start the show, better take your seats. It's been a while, but I'm back on top, to the world is mine, I don't plan to stop.
There's an awful lot of RVs out on the market today that have the Schwintek slide out system. When they work great. However, as you probably already know, these are RVs, so things have a tendency to break. Now, we've had ours for almost 3 years and never had an issue with it, but things can go wrong. That's what we want to talk about today. We're going to cover a little bit of things that can go wrong, a little bit of troubleshooting, and hopefully how to get you out of a pinch. But before we do any of that, I want to show you some of the major components so you can kind of understand how the system works, and that should give you a head start on troubleshooting. If you do have an issue with your slide, before you dig in and start trying to troubleshoot it, you need to understand at least the basic concept of how these Schwintek controller, how these Schwintek slides work, and that's what we're going to cover right now. Now, to me, the heart of the whole system is the controller. It's a little box about yay big. Ours is up in our battery compartment. It is worth maybe trying to locate yours before you do have an issue, just so you know where they're at. But what the controller does, it really syncs the motors. We're going to talk about the motors in a second, but the way these slides work is they have two motors, one on each side, and they're up top of your slide. So what you don't want to happen is the motors to get out of sync, and then that would cause your slide to go in or out cockeyed. So this controller is kind of the brain. It keeps your motors in sync, tells them when to stop, and you know, going out or extending or retract, and just keeps everybody playing nice. The motor 1 and motor 2, keeping them together. Now, with the controller, you have a battery. So your RV battery attaches to the controller. This usually goes through like a 30 amp breaker, and we'll talk about that in a second as well. So that supplies power to the controller. Something else that goes into the controller, there's a switch, maybe your wall switch. So you can, you know, extend or retract your slide using your switch. That is actually wired to the bottom of the controller. And you also have motor 1 and motor 2. Now, this is the important part, I think. So motor 1 and motor 2, these, again, they're up kind of on the top of the slides, and they basically, what they have is a little gear on them, and those little rails that you see on the side, those motors, as they turn, that gear turns inside those rails to either bring your slide in or your slide out. Now, what a lot of people don't really realize is these motors are up top, but they have a shaft that goes all the way down with another gear for your bottom rails. So as these motors are spinning, they're spinning the gears up top, and they're also spinning the gears down at the bottom. So those are really your major components to this whole system. The controller, you have a wall switch, and the controller wires into the motors, and of course you have a battery supplying power to the controller. Now, you may have a couple additional wires going to your controller if you have like a one-touch system or something like that. We're not going to get into that today. We want to keep this strictly talking about the Schwintek's system. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things that could go wrong with the system and some troubleshooting, or at least some troubleshooting ideas. Now, one scenario is your slide won't come in or go out at all. It's just dead. The very first thing I'm going to check is my fuse. We have, the RVs have 12-volt distribution panel, and they have fuses in it. Now, with ours, this is real easy. If the fuse is bad, a little red LED will light up, so I know that it's bad. If your system doesn't have that, you may have to pull the fuse out and take a ohm meter and check it out to make sure it's good or not. But that's the very first thing I'm going to check if my slide does not come in or out at all, if slide system's dead. Another possible situation you could find yourself in is slide comes in or out a little bit and stops. Maybe it binds up, it just won't do anything, and maybe you're trying to leave, you're trying to pack up and go home, and you can't get your slide in. You know, what are some of the possible issues with that? One of the things you can check for in this situation, again, I'm going to do the easiest things first. I'm going to go outside and look at my rails. I'm going to make sure there's nothing bound up in there. There's no dirt in all those grooves, something that could potentially keep one motor from engaging and maybe making the other motor go. So now my slide system gets cockeyed on me. So I'm just going to check for obstructions. So once I go outside, I'm going to do a quick check just to make sure there's nothing obstructing the slide system. Also, what I'll do, and in our case, ours is in our bedroom, so it brings the bed in and out. I'm going to look underneath the bed on the sides, make sure there's no, maybe some shoes or something like that underneath binding things up. Make sure a cabinet door didn't happen to open up and the slide is hitting that cabinet door. So basic obstructions, I'm going to look around for things like that. Now, once I've checked all the easy stuff, the next thing I'm going to probably have to do is go look at my controller. Remember we talked about the controller? I feel it's kind of the brain or the heart of the whole system. But the controller has LEDs on it. It will kind of flash maybe some error codes. And that's what I want to look for, error codes or a fault code. Now, the controller has two LEDs, a green one and a red one. The green one is going to tell you which motor is having the problem. So a single flash means motor 1. 2 flashes means motor 2. So now we're starting to troubleshoot and we're starting to narrow things down. At this point, we already know it's something on the motor 1 side or something on the motor 2 side. The other LED is a red LED, and this will flash error codes, or again, fault codes, anywhere from 2 flashes all the way up to 9 flashes, depending on the fault. Now, some potential faults that this thing can catch is maybe a low RV battery. If your RV battery is too low for the slide system to go in and out, it will tell you that. So now we already figured out what's going on. We can maybe jump our RV battery and give it a little bit more juice and hopefully get the slides in. A couple other faults that can happen, believe it or not, too much power or too much juice in your RV battery. You could have too much current going to one of the motors. This is probably a sign of a motor going bad. So there are some different faults you can follow, or fault codes that should really help you pinpoint things down. Now, while we're in there, if we decide or we see that we have an issue with motor 1, if we want to do a real quick check to verify that, we could take the wiring harnesses for motor 1 and motor 2 where they plug into the controller, switch them around, and see if that error code or that fault code follows to the motor again. So now if the fault was on motor 1, we switch our cables, now it's on motor 2. We've really narrowed this down. It's either going to be the motor, most likely, or the wiring harness to the motor. So that really helps us narrow down the fault, and hopefully we can get things fixed. Now, what do we do if we just have to get our slides in, right? We're camping, we're packing up, our slide won't come in. We have maybe one of these fault codes. Maybe we have something wrong with a motor, it's going bad or something like that. Or potentially we had some debris in our rails, so now our slide is a little bit cockeyed and it keeps binding up on us. How can we get our slide in to go home? And that's what we're going to talk about now. Remember I said the controller, in my opinion, is kind of really the brain of the whole system. And one of the functions of that controller is to keep our motors in sync. Motor 1 and motor 2, we want them to turn at the same time. We want them to stop at the same time and start at the same time. If one goes a little bit faster than the other, when our slide comes in or out, it's going to get cockeyed on us and bind up. So that could be one of our error codes. It could be that something's bound up and is causing an error. How do we get around that? How do we get our slide in so we can at least get home and worry about the situation there? There's something called an electronic manual override. Now what this does is there's a procedure to override basically some of the functionality of the controller. So all we're going to do, we're going to basically bypass all the sensors, and we're just strictly going to supply 12 volt power to the motors. We're kind of overriding all the protection, but we want to just get our slide in. So the way this works is there's a mode button on the controller. You're going to hit it 6 times, just back to back. Every time you hit it, you'll see a little LED flash. On the 7th time, you're going to hold that button in. You're going to hold the mode button in for about 5 seconds, and then you'll see the LEDs flash, so you know that you're in manual override mode. Now at this point, all that controller's doing is supplying power to the motor, so all the sensors are kind of bypassed at this point. Now we can go back into our wall switch and either bring the slide in or out. Now, one thing to be aware of, we're overriding a lot of the protection when we do this. So personally, I would not take my slide and bring it out, because I might not be able to get it back in later, unless I'm at home or in storage somewhere where if I can't get it back in, I'm going to work on it there anyways, then it's not a problem. But if I'm out camping somewhere, I might think twice about that. This is really just to get your slide back in so you can travel. So that's the electronic manual override. Now once you get your slide in, you want to get out of that manual override mode. This is very easy. You use the same mode button, hold it in again for about 5 seconds until you see the lights or the LEDs flash again, and now you're back out of the manual override mode. Now there is something that does happen when you do this. Because we bypassed all the sensors, your motors can get out of sync at this point. Remember, this is just kind of an emergency situation. You're just trying to get your slides in so you can go home. But now that we did this manual override, it's possible that we've got our motors out of sync. And how do we fix that? And that's what we're going to talk about now. We had to do the manual override procedure to get our slides in just so we could get home. We got our, maybe we had a bad motor or something like that, but we got everything fixed. But now the problem is our slides or our motors is actually out of sync. Motor 1 and motor 2, they're out of sync for whatever reason, maybe just because we did the manual override. We have to get those back in sync. It's a pretty simple process, but it's very important also. So the first thing you want to do, again, this is maybe after you've fixed your problem. Maybe this is a problem. Maybe you didn't have any obstructions. Maybe everything was fine, but it's just the problem was your motors are slightly out of sync, causing your slide to bind up on you and stop operating. So how do you get those back in sync? First thing you want to do in this particular case is to run your slide out all the way. Okay, so we're going to extend the slide all the way. Hold your wall switch down for about 3 seconds, and what you're listening for is you want those motors to really stop at the same time. So you want to maybe just be a little bit quiet and listen for your motors. Next thing we're going to do is just bring the slide in just a couple inches, 1 or 2 inches, stop, bring it back out again, extend it all the way, and again hold that wall switch down until your motor stops. Now what we're trying to do is, or the reason for this is, we want those motors when the slide goes out all the way, we want them to stop at the exact same time. So you may have to do this procedure a couple times, run it out, let the motor stop, run it in a couple inches, let the motor stop, back out again. If they're still out of sync, just do this a couple times. Once your motors stop at the exact same time, once you run your system or your slide out, the next thing to do is to bring your slide all the way in, and we're just listening again. We want those motors, when that slide comes all the way in, to stop at the same time. So what we're going to do, we're going to bring it in, we're going to listen for those motors, and hopefully and hold our switch down and let them stop until the motors stop on their own. And at this point, your motor should be synced up again. And if it's not, you're going to have to go back and do the process again. Run the slide out all the way, let the motor stop, bring it in a couple inches, back out, let the motor stop, and just repeat the process until the motors are in sync. Hopefully this gives you enough information that if you do have a Schwintek slide system, you're having some problems with it, it might give you some ideas on what to look for, how to troubleshoot it, in worst case scenario, at least how to get your slide back in so you can get home. If you find information like this helpful, please help us out a little bit. Subscribe to our channel. Make sure you hit the like button. Also leave comments. If you had any problems with your Schwintek system, leave some comments. Let us know what kind of problems you had and what you did to fix it, and maybe we can help some other RVers out there as well. remember, always live life to the fullest.